Hello comrades, it's the Finnish Bolshevik. I'm gonna talk about basically the newest example of the absolute failure and downfall of European social democracy. Or should I say welfare capitalism. Basically, after the Second World War, when Eastern Europe went socialist, what the Western European and Northern European countries did was the capitalist classes of those countries made heavy concessions to the workers. So they said, alright, we'll give you better living standards, social safety nets, higher wages, work safety regulations, 8-hour working day, we'll give you all the stuff that the workers wanted, as long as the capitalists can still stay in power. This began a long period of compromise. The capitalists, they were willing to make compromises with the workers to stay in power, to bribe the workers to be satisfied with their lives. The reasons how they were able to do this are many: increasing and intensifying exploitation of the third world, obviously, but it was also because industrial development post the Second World War was boosting profits in Europe, so they were able to afford this. This kind of policy of compromise between the workers and capitalists, it showed the first signs of coming to an end with neoliberalism. As the Marxist economist Paul Cockshott pointed out, a thing that's very common for industrial countries is that as they are industrializing, they have extremely good growth, high profits. But then when they have industrialized, there is a slump. And that basically happened. And a number of countries like the UK, for instance, in the 70s, and then Finland and other countries in the 80s, they started using neoliberalism to revitalize the profits. I've already talked about social democracy and why, social democracy or welfare capitalism doesn't actually fix anything, and you can check that video out. I'm gonna put the link in the description. Social democracy and welfare capitalism are dying. Things in the West, European welfare capitalist countries, are not getting better, they're getting worse. Especially since the 2008 global capitalist crisis, we have been in austerity. So they've been cutting wages, cutting benefits, privatizing healthcare, privatizing education, increased all kinds of fees when it comes to education and healthcare and basic necessities. Taxes on the working class have increased, while taxes on the rich have decreased. Unemployment has continued to rise. And now, in one of the biggest cities of Finland, there has been a proposal for a policy change. Now, this recent proposal is basically a continuation of a trend. Early this year, there was a fairly big strike, an exceptionally big strike, and it was also an exception because it was a political strike, which tend to be more rare, especially in these times. But there was a political strike against what they call the active employment model. What active employment means is that you need to do a bunch of stuff, perform work, perform some kind of tasks and bullshit courses and stuff like that in order to be given any money by the government. They're penalizing the unemployed. They're saying that in order for you to get unemployment benefits, you need to do a bunch of bullshit. You basically need to work for free. We're not gonna give you a wage, but if you work, we're gonna give you benefits. It was basically a way of shifting the blame to the unemployed themselves. They say that they want to punish the unemployed harder to incentivize them to find work. Well, obviously that's bullshit, because the reason that these people are unemployed in the first place is because there's not enough jobs. So this is a continuation of that. So they already say that if you want unemployment benefits, you gotta perform slave labor. And that might sound hyperbolic, but that's literally what it is. You have to perform work at totally substandard compensation. Otherwise, you won't get anything. Now, they want to extend this to the fucking breadlines. The headline of this says, Activity Model for Breadlines. It says that in order for you to be entitled to go to a fucking breadline and get food, you have to start doing a bunch of shit. You have to take part in some food-related courses, or you have to do some kind of work. People can no longer just go to a breadline because they're really poor and really hungry. No, they have to jump through a bunch of hoops to even be allowed to go to a fucking breadline. Oh, breadlines are bad. Yeah. How about you do something about the poverty? Instead of punishing the people, you think people want to go to a fucking breadline, for Christ's sake? That's humiliating enough. But then they have to jump through all these hoops to even be allowed to go to the breadline now. The first part of this article basically says that the idea is that in order for you to be allowed to go to a breadline, you need to do a bunch of stuff. And it's just meant to punish the poor. And the second part of it talks about how these politicians are complaining that the breadlines are too big and they don't look good and shit like that. It says they want breadlines off the streets. Well, yeah. Breadlines since the 90s have not tremendously reduced poverty. Yeah, they have not. Because breadlines, it's too little. You gotta do bigger things than that. But basically they're complaining that it looks bad that we have like 10-mile long breadlines. Like, yeah, it looks bad. But what are you gonna do? That's capitalism. These are not because of shortages. Like in the late 80s in the Soviet Union, they had long lines in shops of people going to buy food. But these are not shops. These are lines of people who can't afford food. In the Soviet Union, in the late 80s, people were queuing to buy food. But here, people are queuing to beg for food. So they're saying, yeah, we need to get these bread lines off the streets because they look bad. Well, how about you actually fix the poverty instead of just trying to hide it? Now, another story. This is a healthcare related story. You know how Finland is supposed to have allegedly free healthcare? I don't know where that idea comes from because it's not free. It's just kind of affordable. But this other story, it's about a woman who was in need of healthcare, but the hospital said, you are fit enough to go home. You are well enough, you can go home, because we need more space for more people, because, the hospitals are understaffed and underfunded, and they have too many patients, so they're like, you're fine, go home. We'll send somebody to help you at home, because that's what they do, they send people to take care of these. It's cheaper to have them go home than to keep them in the hospital. But you know what happened? This woman was found dead, and they had been dead in their apartment for a full week before anybody discovered it. They were a rotting corpse by the time somebody noticed. This is the state of healthcare in this country. This is just absolute disregard and neglect of people. This is capitalism.